Today, I'm here with Louie, who spent over 27 years working for the U.S. Department of State. And during this time in his service, he frequently went to Kosovo and was later a founder of the American University of Kosovo. Good morning, Louie.
Good morning.
Can you please state your full name for the record?
Louis Sell.
And today's date is May 18th, 2024. So Louie, can you tell us about the first time you went and visited Kosovo?
The first time I visited Kosovo was, I'm pretty sure at some point in 1987. In 1987, I went to Belgrade as political counselor. We already talked in this series of interviews about that. And Kosovo was part of Serbia, was becoming already in 87 becoming a major political issue. And so I went down there in 87, and throughout the next 4 years, from 87 through 91, I went there often and observed what was going on and met lots of people there.
Mm-hmm. And I think in one of your previous interviews, you mentioned that you felt like Kosovo ended up playing a role in the disintegration of Yugoslavia.
Kosovo was the detonator which drove the disintegration. Kosovo was what Milosevic seized on to gain supreme power in Serbia, to oust his mentor and rival Ivan Stambolic, whom his wife later had killed, I think. And then it was the driving force in Serbian nationalism, which Milosevic both stimulated and exploited to try and build his position across Yugoslavia. It's remotely conceivable that you could have managed a dissolution of Yugoslavia without Kosovo, or that you could have managed some kind of an international agreement without Kosovo. But with Kosovo and with Milosevic having exploited it to gain power, you couldn't. It was driving disintegrative forces, and it was blocking efforts at achieving agreement as well, international agreement. And I can talk more detail about that if you want. So it was just central, mm-hmm. and still is in a way. Even now, 2024, the issue is not solved. Kosovo is independent, but it's not recognized as such by Serbia. It's not a member of the UN. It's being blocked by Russia and China, and the status is still open, at least in the eyes of Serbia and its backers.
Mm-hmm. And how would you say the Dayton peace process affected Kosovo?
Well, Dayton, the way Dayton happened made conflict almost inevitable. Dayton was about Bosnia, and to a somewhat lesser extent, Croatia, but mainly about Bosnia. The Croats had solved their own problem militarily by driving the Serbs out of all but a sliver of Croatia. Early on, it was decided that Dayton would only deal with Bosnia, and that made sense in some ways. Bosnia complex enough. Add Kosovo, it could well have become insoluble. So I went, for instance, as the American, but on Carl's European team, once it became clear that Kosovo was not going to be dealt with at Dayton, and Carl had the title European Negotiator for Peace in the former Yugoslavia, And he, knowing that I knew Kosovo pretty well, knew all the players, he sent me to Kosovo in the summer of 1995, no, fall of 1990, before Dayton. It must have been September, to tell Ibrahim Rugova, who was by then the acknowledged leader of the Kosovo Albanians, that that Kosovo would not be discussed at Dayton. And I had known Rugova by then for a long time. I was probably the first diplomat to meet him in 1988 as he emerged as the de facto leader of the Kosovo Albanians in their resistance to the Serbian takeover, their nonviolent resistance. So I went to see Rugova and and I've written about this in my diary, and I can't remember whether I wrote anything else, but had a long conversation with Rugova, and he said, okay, basically his message was, all right, I understand. It's good to end the war in Bosnia, that we should end conflict, and I can see it's hard to do that if you threw in Kosovo. But please remember, you need to address Kosovo quickly. Situation is changing here. I can't guarantee how much longer I can lead the Kosovars in nonviolent resistance, which he had done. Quite uncharacteristic for Albanians, quite uncharacteristic for the Balkans. Their resistance under Rugova's leadership had been nonviolent, creating this underground parallel state under illegal, armed, brutal Serbian occupation. And what he said was basically, there are groups in Kosovo who believe that we can't continue that, and unless he didn't describe them, but he didn't give them a name. But as he did, it was clear he was talking about the KLA and the predecessors to the KLA, and the Kosovo Liberation Army, which led the resistance beginning in 97 and 98. And he said, I can't be sure I can continue to channel things in a nonviolent direction. Mm-hmm. And that was his response, basically. And he was right about that. Showed his wisdom, I think.
Did you have any further interactions with him between that conversation and whenever violence started to break out with the KLA in about 97?
I don't think I saw him again until the year 2000. So by the year 2000, early 2000, I had left the State Department, retired from the State Department, and I had been asked to go back by friends, and I headed the Kosovo office after the war for the International Crisis Group, and there I met Rugova again.
Okay,
and he was a very different person.
In what ways?
He was sort of like earlier when we talked about Russia, and I talked about Yeltsin never being the same after having to call in the Russian military and use tanks to shell Russian people rebelling against him. And I think Rugova never seemed to quite be the same person after the war in 1999. What happened to him there, which was basically once NATO bombing began and the violence really began, Rugova stayed in Kosovo, but the Serbs came to him and forced him to go to Belgrade, and he appeared on television making some very compromising statements about NATO and about Kosovo. And watching him, seeing that, it was clear it was under duress, but I along with everyone else, assumed that Ibrahim Rugova's political career and maybe his life was over. That one and maybe the second would not survive that. But it did. He came back and he was elected as the first president, and his political party, the LDK, won the first election pretty hands down in 2000, which was a surprise to an awful lot of people. But he, as a human being, he just didn't seem the same. He told me, obviously I talked to him about this, and he said, Louis, they threatened my family. And to which, when I would say that to some of my Kosovo contacts or friends, the Albanian, they said, that's immaterial. He betrayed Kosovo, and he should have died, and he should have been willing to have his family die rather than become an instrument of Milosevic. And it shows you a lot about, he knew that. He knew that a lot of people are going to think that. Maybe he thought it was right. I don't know. He was just not the same. He was behaved differently. His health didn't seem to be as good. He seemed more distant. You know, we were always kind of close. Like when I went there in '95, and I've arranged a meeting, and we were going to talk about Dayton. And he was there with a couple advisors, and he said, "Okay, you guys can leave." And just the two of us sat and talked for hours, basically, like we used to. That he was much more formal and reserved when I saw him later. And maybe it was partly because I'm no longer American diplomat. I'm an ICG person, not the same status, but it just seemed different.
Mm-hmm. And so when you were with the ICG, you were the Kosovo director in 2000. What did that look like? What were you doing in Kosovo? What was your role?
Well, I was kind of a journalist. It was a new experience for me. I was not representing the United States government in any way, although I think a lot of Kosovars didn't get the distinction. And I had no executive authority. So as you well know, friends of mine were there, future colleagues in the AUK were there, and my job was basically to report what's going on in an honest fashion. The International Crisis Group saw itself as kind of the international conscience, or also like an international intelligence or diplomatic mission to sending in capable, informed people to crisis areas and alerting the world to what was going on, to give the civil society across the world some independent information on what's going on. And so I found myself writing about what was going on in ways that probably at times made some of my former colleagues uncomfortable, as they did with me. The day I arrived, or no, shortly after, I guess I arrived in Kosovo, the UNMIK, UN mission in Kosovo, at the behest of Hashim Thaçi, the leader of the KLA, supposedly, basically made a decision. No one in the international mission should talk to ICG, because Thaçi didn't like what we were saying. And as best I could tell, most people ignored that in either the international mission or beyond. And certainly I did talk to Thaçi and became friends with Thaçi. And I actually respect Thaçi. And I think he grew immensely over the years. And, he's not perfect, but who is? And I have differences in that with some of my Kosovar friends. But anyway, it's a new role. And you're also supposed to be a public voice. You're not supposed to pull your punches in public, and you're not a diplomat anymore. So you write what you say, believe, and sometimes the Kosovars would criticize me. I won't mention any names, but threats from Kosovars to you're writing untruths about us. And I said, no, we're not. We stand behind what we're writing. However, if you can show me we're wrong, I will write that. I'll publish it.
Can you provide any examples of these contentious topics?
Oh, basically accusing some members of the former KLA senior people improper behavior.
Mm-hmm. And so how long did you do this role with ICG?
A year. Almost a year, less than a year, but I came early in 2000 and left at toward the end of 2000.
Mm-hmm. And then did you stay involved in Kosovo after your role in ICG?
Yeah, I went back several times a year to do reporting for various groups, including Public International Law and Policy Group, PILPG, founded by friends of mine. It's a pro bono legal organization, but also did policy work. And I did work for them both in the Balkans and in the Caucasus. And then I went back in 2003. I was asked for AUK, as the executive director.
That stands for American University in Kosovo?
I became the executive director of the American University and Kosovo Foundation, which was the American not-for-profit, which emerged as the driving force behind the creation of the university.
Okay. And what was your kind of goal and mission whenever you became a part of that initiative?
To set up the university, get it going, and I could have and maybe should have stayed as its first head on site, but I didn't. I promised Kathy, my wife, I would stay there no more than a year, which I did. And, we talked it over. And by then we'd been married 35 years or something like that. And over 4 years, we lived apart by virtue of war or peace negotiations or setting up a university, and decided that was enough.
Mm-hmm. And how have you seen the school change over the years? So you still stay involved even when you haven't been there,
still on
right?
the board. I stayed on as the executive director to 2007, I think. Then I went back to the board at some point for a few years. I left the board in 2012 after serving as interim president for a while, and then came back on the board in 2018, something like that. I'm still a member of the board, and I will leave either this year or next. I'm not totally clear.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the change. We've created a great institution. It's the finest educational institution in Kosovo, and among the finest in the Balkans. We've provided a quality American style education to university education to over 2,000 young Kosovars, mostly young. We have a few sort of adult or grown-up graduates, mostly young people who have gone on to do a lot of good things. We started in 2003, and I, along with a couple other members of the team, I interviewed all of our candidates, and one of the young people I interviewed is a candidate for our first class. Years later, became the first female foreign minister of Kosovo. And we have people who have served in important government positions, and we have people who have gone on to found their own businesses. And our mission was to provide a quality education to the young leadership people in the leadership position, future leadership positions in Kosovo, to further the creation of that country in a prosperous democratic society. And I think we're fulfilling it.
Mm-hmm. And having served as a diplomat yourself for a number of years, what advice would you give to young Kosovans who have an interest in getting involved in diplomacy and are really facing a lot of daunting challenges in that current ecosystem.
Well, I would say, you know, in some ways it's easier to be a diplomat from a big, powerful country than it is to be a diplomat in a small, not so powerful country. And there's really a lot of scope for capable diplomats. Kosovo needs capable diplomats. It's important as they do that to remember, as a diplomat, you need to be friends with everyone, or at least to have contacts with everyone. You know who your friends are, okay, but people who you think might not be friends, maybe those are the ones you need most of all to talk to, at least to understand. And that's something that Kosovars are gradually coming to the understanding, I think.
Mm-hmm. Having yourself spent a significant amount of time in Belgrade, would you have any recommendations on how to bridge that cross-ethnic gap that is still pretty apparent?
I think there is ever since the war, we've been one way or the other trying to solve that, get an agreement that both the Kosovars and the Serbs will voluntarily agree to, which will settle that conflict. And they did once, and we shot it down. It's not going to happen. We probably, having shot down that one agreement which was feasible, I don't think there's any other. I'd like to think that the current agreement on the table will work, but I'm not convinced it won't. Maybe you can make it work, but the international community has to. We basically have to tell the Kosovars and the Serbs, here's the way it's going to be. And I have had both senior Serbs and senior Kosovars, or we had senior Bosnians for that matter, say, this is what you need to do. Franjo Tuđman, at one point, I think it was the first time he and Carl got together after I negotiated this peace agreement between the two guys. And he said something, a little bit paraphrasing, but Tuđman said, why are you wasting your time in Dayton? You need just to tell the Bosnians and the Serbs what to do and make them do it. And he was saying that because he'd already gotten what he wanted. So fair enough. It's not totally true, but it was true after the war. People expected that's what would happen, and we thought we wasted time trying to get them both to agree to something. And I've had senior Serbs and senior Kosovars say it's not going to happen. But now it's almost impossible for me to think that the international community could actually do that. The international community is now so deeply divided that that's probably also impossible. Can you imagine right now Russia and the United States and China sitting down together, and let's say Brussels, throw the Europeans into the mix, and well, the four would come together in agreement what to do about Kosovo? No, not going to happen.